Hi, I'm the daughter they now call a snake. Not because I lied, not because I stole, but because I refused to hand over the home I worked my whole life for. To the golden boy who never paid a bill in his life. They didn't just cut me out of the family, they showed up at my door with a crowbar. But what I had in my hands when I opened that door, that's when everything changed. Want to know what they saw? When I woke up that morning, the air in my apartment felt too still, like the world had paused before something terrible. My phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand, notifications rolling in one after another, missed calls, messages, mentions. It was barely 7 a.m., and already my peace was gone. The first message I saw was from Claire, a coworker I'd known for 5 years. "Hey Tamsin, are you okay? I saw what your mom posted." I frowned, half asleep, half confused. What could my mother have possibly said online that would make my coworkers message me before sunrise? I opened Facebook and there it was. My entire body went cold before I even finished reading the first line. "We raised a snake that bears our name, an ungrateful child." Her words sat on the glowing screen like poison. 128 comments, 64 shares. It wasn't just a family outburst, it was a public execution. I scrolled down slowly, my fingers trembling. Names I recognized. Neighbors from back home, distant cousins, old church friends, all piling in with sympathy for her. She did everything for that girl. Some kids forget who fed them. She should be ashamed. Then I saw the one that made me sit up straight. Ronan, my brother. His comment read, "Family means giving back, not taking." He had attached a photo of the apartment I'd just bought, a snapshot I'd posted a week ago, proud and exhausted after years of working 2 jobs. So that was it. That was the crime. I hadn't given back my apartment to him. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I clicked on my mother's profile picture. Her smiling face stared back at me, the same face that used to lean over my bed when I was sick, whispering prayers. Now she had turned that same soft voice into a weapon and aimed it straight at me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My chest felt tight, and my throat ached like I'd swallowed gravel. I wasn't angry yet, just stunned, hollow. I kept scrolling as if maybe I'd find a comment from someone defending me. There wasn't one. Not a single person asked for my side of the story. I locked my phone and set it down, but the silence that followed was worse. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. A dog barked somewhere outside. The sunlight through the blinds made lines across my floor like bars. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, but my hand shook so badly it sloshed onto the counter. I leaned there for a long time, breathing slow. It wasn't just that she'd called me ungrateful. It was how easily people believed her, how fast they'd erased years of sacrifice. I'd worked 2 jobs through college. I'd paid off Dad's medical bills when he lost insurance. I'd covered Ronan's credit card debt so he wouldn't ruin his score before applying for a loan. And now I was the villain. I picked up the phone again and clicked the comment box under my mother's post. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type something, anything, to defend myself. But what could I possibly say that wouldn't make it worse? The truth was too long for a comment, too painful for emojis, too complex for people who only wanted gossip. I deleted the half-written reply and instead took a screenshot of the post. My hand felt steady again, but my heart was a wreck. I opened my notes app and typed just one line. "This will not break me." It was the only thing I could control right then, my decision not to let them rewrite who I was. The phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from my cousin. "Tamsin, what's going on? Your mom says you took something that wasn't yours." I stared at the words until they blurred. The apartment wasn't taken. It was mine, signed, paid for, and earned one overtime shift at a time. But none of that mattered anymore. In their eyes, the story was already written, the selfish daughter who betrayed her family. I looked at the clock, 7:42 a.m. My hands were still cold. I walked to the window, watching the street outside fill with early commuters. Normal people starting normal days. I felt like I was standing behind glass, watching a world I didn't belong to anymore. That's when the doorbell rang. A sharp, urgent sound that cut through the quiet like a blade. For a moment, I thought it might be a delivery, but then came the voice I hadn't heard since last week. "Open up, Tamsin. We need to talk." My father's voice, calm but firm. The kind of tone that didn't ask, it commanded. My stomach twisted. He had driven here? That meant they'd talked about this, planned it, maybe even rehearsed what they'd say. I didn't move. I stood there staring at the door like it might open on its own. Then came another voice. Mom's. Softer but sharper. "You can't ignore us forever. We're not leaving until you open this door." Behind her, Ronan's voice joined in, lower, almost smug. "You owe us an explanation." I felt my pulse race again. The same rhythm I remembered from years of family arguments, when they'd corner me until I gave in, apologizing for things I hadn't done just to make the shouting stop. But this time it was different. There was no shouting yet, but I could feel it brewing in their throats. I stepped back, steadying my breath. The phone buzzed again, another text from Claire. "Don't engage. People like that want you to react." I almost smiled. People like that. My own family. The knocking grew louder, heavier, more desperate. I glanced at the framed photo on the wall. Me at 18, standing beside them in front of our old house. My mother's arm around me, her smile wide and warm. My father's hand on my shoulder, proud. Ronan in the middle, grinning like he'd never lose. The picture tilted slightly as the next knock hit. I reached for it, steadied the frame, then let my hand fall. I didn't owe that photo anything anymore. I walked to the door but didn't touch the handle. Their voices blurred into a mix of guilt and accusation, like a chorus of every manipulation I'd ever endured. "Tamsin, you're making a scene. You think you're better than your family now? Open up, we're not done talking." Every word hit like a drumbeat against the wood. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. The smell of coffee still lingered in the kitchen. The hum of the fridge sounded distant now. All I could really hear were their voices, and underneath, something else. The sound of myself deciding. I didn't have to open that door, not this time. I turned away and sat on the couch, hands clasped tight to stop the shaking. I stared at the door as their voices grew louder, and with each knock, I could hear years of manipulation echoing through it. And for the first time in my life, I let it stay closed. I didn't move for a long time. After I let the door stay closed, I just stood there. The air inside my apartment felt like it was pressing in from all sides, thick with old memories and fresh disbelief. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was slow and heavy, like something had finally settled. Their voices on the other side kept shifting, from loud demands to hushed manipulations, back to frustrated whispers. The kind they used when they thought guilt would open a door faster than shouting. Then, a different sound. A small metallic scrape. Just once. Soft enough that if I hadn't been so still, I might have missed it. I turned my head, eyes locking onto the doorknob. Another scrape. It hit me like ice down my spine. They still had the spare key. Months ago, back when this place was still drywall and wires, I handed my father the extra key. I didn't think twice. "In case of emergencies," I'd said. His reply had been smooth, reassuring. "Of course, sweetheart, just in case." But now, this wasn't an emergency. This was a siege. I rushed to the door, heart now pounding again. As I reached for the deadbolt, I heard the key enter the lock. It turned halfway before I got there. My fingers wrapped around the bolt and shoved it down with a loud, final click. The knob jiggled uselessly. "Tammy," my dad's voice called, muffled but firm. "You really think a lock can keep your family out?" Then Ronan's laugh followed, a lazy, mocking sound. "She's scared. That's all this is." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The click of that deadbolt was the only response I owed them. I backed away from the door, still holding my breath. I hadn't realized how fast everything had turned. Just an hour ago, I'd woken up thinking it was going to be a normal Monday. Now, I was barricading myself from my own family, the same people I once trusted with everything. I sat down on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to my chest. It wasn't sadness that filled me now. It was something sharper, something colder. It was the realization that what they wanted wasn't love or connection. They wanted control, and they were willing to use anything to get it. From the hallway, my mom's voice rose, shrill and desperate now. "You'll regret this. You're turning your back on blood." Blood. That word had always felt sacred to me, like something that bound us tighter than rope, stronger than steel. But hearing it now, it sounded more like a threat than a promise. I remembered the day I gave them that key, the smell of fresh paint in the hallway, the pride in my chest as I showed them the kitchen, the balcony, the little corner where I planned to read in the mornings. My dad had nodded, pretending to admire the countertops. My mom had said it felt temporary. "You'll settle down eventually," she told me. "This place won't matter then." That should have been my first warning. They never saw this. Apartment as mine, just a placeholder until I came to my senses, until I handed it over. They never asked how many shifts I picked up to afford it, never saw me come home at 2 a.m. with aching feet and numb fingers from working events, restaurants, and admin gigs. To them, it was a gift waiting to be claimed. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen, poured myself some water, this time without spilling it. My hands had stopped shaking. I sipped it and leaned on the counter, staring at the door like it might move again. But the voices were gone now. I waited, maybe 10 more minutes, until I heard footsteps retreating. No more banging, no more shouting. Just silence, thick and uneasy. I stayed near the window, peeking through the blinds like a kid hiding from trouble. Down on the sidewalk, I saw them walking toward the car, Mom, Dad, and Ronan, all moving in step like they hadn't just tried to barge into my life. My mom turned and looked up at my building. Even from here, I could feel the heat in her glare. Then they got in and drove away. I didn't exhale until the car turned the corner. I dropped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, feeling like the entire building might collapse from the weight of that morning. So much damage from just one post, one key, one lie. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but it was like the tears couldn't find their way out. Instead, I just felt tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes you want to sleep for a week. I thought about calling someone, Claire maybe, but what would I say? "Hey, my parents tried to break into my apartment after publicly crucifying me on Facebook." That didn't sound like something you casually slip into conversation over coffee. I closed my eyes and tried to listen. To the quiet. Not for what was outside, but for what was inside. That's when I heard it again. Not a sound this time, but a realization. A shift. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt done. Done playing the good daughter. Done trying to earn their approval with sacrifice after sacrifice. Done letting guilt dictate every decision. The key was never about safety. It was about access. And today, I'd finally revoked it. As the afternoon sun shifted and the light moved across my living room floor, I stayed curled up on the couch. I didn't move again until the sky started to darken. Hunger pulled me off the cushion, and I fixed myself a sandwich I barely tasted. The apartment felt different now, not safer, just mine. A little quieter, a little more honest. I was rinsing my plate when I heard the softest sound, just a tiny thump against the door. I froze. No voices, no banging, just that small sound. I walked over slowly, looked through the peephole. No one. When I opened the door, I saw it sitting on the floor, a small, worn-out jewelry box. I recognized it instantly. It used to sit on my mother's dresser. Next to it was a folded piece of paper. Inside the box was the spare key, and the note said, "We'll come back tomorrow." The moment I picked up the box, I could feel the weight of it was wrong. Not heavy, no, it was light, but it carried something heavier than metal. I opened the lid, and there it was. The spare key, the one I had given them months ago. And stuck to its side, still faintly sticky and smelling like old Cabernet, was a dried wine stain. And just like that, I was back there, 24 hours earlier, sitting at that long, polished dining table in my parents' house. The one with the linen napkins none of us were allowed to actually use, and the centerpiece no one was allowed to move. It was my father's 60th birthday. Everything was laid out perfectly, like a Hallmark commercial come to life. My mother, Maris, flitted between the kitchen and dining room, correcting the way the cutlery faced, adjusting the lighting, pouring wine even if you hadn't asked for it. She was playing hostess, but really, she was directing. Every move choreographed. Dad sat at the head of the table, already half a glass in, laughing a little too loud. Ronan, my brother, was lounging like he owned the place, all button-up bravado and fake humility. I sat across from him, trying to stay small. I don't know why. I'd worn a dress I liked. I'd brought a bottle of wine. I'd even helped cook. But somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, I started to feel like a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. Then Ronan clinked his glass. "I've got something to share," he said, smiling wide. "My apartment downtown is finally ready, just in time for the business launch." The words froze mid-air. I didn't even blink at first. My apartment, the one I paid for, managed renovations on, fought banks over. He said it so easily, like he was reading from a press release, like it had always been his. Laughter rippled around the table. My Aunt Carla raised her glass. "Look at you, Ronan. Timing is everything." I stared at my plate. I could feel the blood drain from my face, and I willed myself to breathe, to smile, anything but explode. "Oh, come on, Tamsin," Maris said from the far end, her voice dripping with sugary sarcasm. "Don't look so shocked. You know we only let you stay there because of Ronan's investment." Another round of chuckles. Someone muttered, "Family helps family, right?" That's when the glass in my hand began to tremble. I held it tighter, too tight, the stem pressing into my palm like a warning. I didn't speak. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had too much. The words were sharp, unfiltered, and I knew once they left my mouth, I wouldn't be able to take them back. So I swallowed them, all of them. Even when my father leaned back and said, "You should be grateful we even keep you close." That did it. Not a knife, not a slap. Just that sentence. I excused myself. Bathroom, water, fresh air, any lie would do. I walked into the hallway, pressed my hands against the wall, and stared at the family, photos. There I was, year after year, standing slightly apart in every picture. The observer, the one holding the camera, the one they left out and didn't notice. I remember I drove home that night gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. When I got inside, I dropped the wine-stained key on the counter and didn't look at it again, until now. Back in the present, I sat on the floor with that same key in my hand, The stain now dried into something almost permanent, like the memory. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't a bad night or an accidental slip of words. It was a pattern, and I had let it repeat for years. I heard the click of someone walking past my door, footsteps echoing in the hallway. But I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I sat there for what felt like hours, the key still warm from my grip, the note still lying flat beside me. "We'll come back tomorrow." They didn't just want my space. They wanted my silence, my compliance, my erasure. But I wasn't going to give it to them anymore. They didn't just steal my voice that night. They tried to erase my name. I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, watching its blades spin like the thoughts in my head. Fast, useless, exhausting. Around 6:01 a.m., I gave up pretending. I got dressed, made coffee I didn't drink, and drove straight to the office. The parking lot was still half empty when I pulled in. The sunrise barely kissed the skyline, and the streetlights hadn't even shut off yet. I liked getting in early sometimes when everything was quiet, and I could hear myself think. But this morning, quiet felt different. Tense, like the air was holding its breath along with me. As I unlocked the glass doors, I could still feel the imprint of that note. "We'll come back tomorrow," burning in the back of my mind. I didn't know what they meant exactly, but I knew better than to underestimate them. Not anymore. I tossed my bag onto my desk, powered up my computer, and logged into our shared property database. My fingers moved on autopilot. Click, scroll, search. I typed in the property code, pulled up the archive folder. Nothing. That wasn't right. I refreshed the screen. Tried another tag. Still nothing. I clicked through every tab, even the admin-only folders. My apartment, my name, was gone. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a technical hiccup. But no, the digital paper trail just stopped. My heart started to pound again, not like panic, but like warning drums. I stood, went to the file cabinet in the back corner, and opened the drawer marked Residential Ownership, Vale, empty. All that was left was a single blank folder with my handwriting on the tab, Final Copies, TV. And that's when I knew. They hadn't just humiliated me online, they were trying to take it all. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and called my contact at the bank. I'd worked with Mark for years. He'd helped me through the loan process, advised me on every tiny detail when I bought that apartment. When he answered, his tone was chipper, casual. "Morning, Tamsin. Everything okay?" I skipped the pleasantries. "Mark, I need to ask, has anyone made any changes to my mortgage or deed records?" There was a pause, followed by the sound of keyboard clicks. "Give me a sec. Actually, yes. A name change request was filed 3 days ago." I blinked. "What?" "It's listed here. Request to change ownership from Tamsin Vale to Ronan Vale. We flagged it for manual verification since the request came through a personal email address instead of your broker." The room tilted for a second. I sat down slowly, gripping the arm of my chair like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Do you have the request on file?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mark hesitated. "Yeah, it even includes a signature. Looks like yours, honestly." But it wasn't. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't requested anything. He had forged me. I thanked Mark, barely remembering what I said. After the call, I just sat there. My palms were damp, my stomach hollow. The pen I kept on my desk, silver, heavy, the one I'd used to sign the original ownership papers, was still there, sitting in its little holder like a trophy. Now it looked more like a murder weapon. A flashback hit me, soft and sharp, like a whisper through broken glass. It was the day I closed on the apartment. My mother had shown up to help, even though she'd never really supported me getting a place on my own. I remember her standing beside me at the title office, looking over the paperwork. "Why don't you let Ronan handle this part?" she had said. "He's always been better with numbers. You've got enough on your plate." And I'd listened, like a fool, like a daughter still trying to earn their trust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood up. I went back to the system, back to the email logs, back to every document I'd ever sent or received. I pulled every receipt, every time-stamped record, every signed form that still carried the ink from my real pen, not the forgery. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I titled it Evidence. When I was done printing, I gathered it all, over 100 pages, and slid them into a manila folder. I wrote my name in thick black letters across the front. My real name. Not the version Ronan tried to claim. Not the erased version Maris wanted. I locked the folder in my file cabinet and slid the silver pen on top, right where I could see it. They thought they could rewrite my life. They didn't count on me keeping the receipts. I realized then, if they were ready to steal my name, I'd make sure they could never steal my truth. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops when my phone started buzzing. Not a gentle morning ping, but a rapid-fire assault. Vibrations, chimes, notifications that lit up the screen like a warning flare. I groaned and reached over, squinting against the early light leaking in through the blinds. My lock screen was a battlefield. Dozens of messages, mostly from old coworkers, some from neighbors I barely knew. One from Janice at church. "Are you okay? I saw the post. Praying for you." The words didn't register right away. Then came another. "Don't let them get away with this, Tamsin." I opened Facebook. And there it was, my mother's profile picture staring back at me like a ghost I hadn't asked to see. Her post had already racked up over 100 shares. "We raised a snake that bears our name, an ungrateful child who stole from her own brother." That line, that venom, poured into a public space where people smiled at me every Sunday and brought casseroles to potlucks. The comments poured in beneath it. Some offered support, but most just nodded in agreement, like the verdict had already been handed down. "Family doesn't do that to family." "Poor Ronan. That's heartbreaking." It wasn't just gossip. It was a sentence, and they made sure it arrived before breakfast. I barely had time to breathe before the knock came, not the hesitant kind. It was hard, loud, almost theatrical. I stood, padded barefoot to the door, heart climbing fast up my ribs. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was, but I did anyway. There they stood. My mother, stiff-backed in her pressed blouse and pearl necklace like she was heading into Sunday service. My father beside her, jaw clenched. And Ronan, holding a crowbar. That metal bar glinted under the hallway light, gripped in his hand like it belonged there. I didn't open the door. I didn't even flinch. "Tamsin!" my mother called out, her voice pitched in that rehearsed righteousness she wore so well. "You've left us no choice." I pressed my hand flat against the wood, grounding myself. "You already made your choice," I answered, calm. "You made it when you called me a snake." Silence. Then the scrape of metal. Ronan wedged the crowbar under the doorframe. The wood creaked slightly, but the deadbolt held. "She's forcing our hand," my father muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. That line, it wasn't even surprising anymore. Every time they did something cruel, they framed it as duty. Every betrayal cloaked in responsibility, in love. I stepped back slowly, walked over to the console table, and grabbed my phone. I opened the camera and hit record. If they wanted a scene, I'd give them one they couldn't rewrite. I walked back, phone held steady, pointed right at the door. "You're being recorded," I said loud enough for it to carry. "Every hit you make, every word you say, it's on the record now." Everything went still. Ronan's hand froze mid-movement. My mother's eyes darted to the peephole, and I imagined her calculating, searching for an angle where she still came out as the victim. My father said nothing. "What are you holding?" he asked finally, low and wary. I didn't blink. "The truth." No one spoke. The crowbar lowered slowly. Ronan let it drop to his side like it had suddenly gotten heavier. My mother clutched her necklace tighter, as if it might protect her from the weight of what she'd started. "You've made this harder than it needed to be," she said, almost a whisper. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The camera was still rolling. I held it there for another moment, then ended the recording and saved it. I took one deep breath and turned away. I didn't look back when I heard their footsteps fade, didn't watch the elevator door close. I just stood there, phone still in my hand, heart pounding, but steady. Not scared, not this time. 20 minutes later, someone else knocked, but this time it wasn't for me. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet, except for the low static of a radio and the rhythmic thud of footsteps. I cracked the door open just enough to see two uniformed officers walking toward me, their presence cutting through the heavy air like a blade. Behind them stood my parents and Ronan. My brother's hand was still loosely gripping the crowbar, like he didn't quite know what to do with it now. My mother's face was a mask of forced calm, lips pursed, pearls steady. My father stood stiff, arms crossed, as if trying to shrink behind authority, but still keep his pride intact. The officer closest to me glanced between all of us. "We got a report of an attempted break-in. Which one of you made the call?" I raised my hand. No hesitation, no apology. "That'd be me." My mother gasped like I'd confessed to murder. "You called the police on your own family?" Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from sheer disbelief that I'd broken the unspoken rule. Don't involve outsiders. "Yes," I said simply, "because I'm done pretending this is normal." Ronan stepped forward, voice sharp. "She's lying. That place is mine. Dad gave it to me. She's squatting." I didn't flinch. I reached back into my apartment, grabbed the folder I'd labeled Evidence, and handed it to Officer Ramirez. Inside, the forged paperwork, the fake signature request, time-stamped emails showing how Ronan tried to switch ownership, the same documents I'd printed the night before, hands shaking but focused. He opened the folder and started flipping through it. His partner stood by the door, scanning the scene. The crowbar on the floor, the dent in the doorframe, it all lined up. My mother whispered sharply, "You're humiliating us in front of strangers." I looked her in the eyes. "You did that online," I replied. "You made sure of it." Ramirez cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to my father, "your son attempted to force entry into a private residence using a weapon. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." Howard, my father, tried to step in, voice calm, controlled. "This is a family matter. We can resolve it internally." But the officer didn't budge. "Not anymore." The look on my father's face. I'd seen it before. Not sadness, not guilt, disappointment. But not the kind that comes from your child doing wrong. It was the kind that comes when your control slips through your fingers. I used to chase his approval like air. Now, watching him lose grip of the narrative, I didn't feel small. I felt free. The officers asked them to step back, one at a time. Ronan was the first to protest, muttering under his breath as they led him toward the elevator. My mother followed, quiet but fuming. My father didn't say a word as he passed me. But then, just before the elevator doors closed, my mother turned back. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I met her eyes. Calm. Even. "No," I whispered, closing my door gently. "I'll finally sleep." The latch clicked shut, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence felt like mine. I leaned against the wall inside, heart still pacing but no longer panicked. The hallway outside echoed faintly with retreating voices, the soft hum of the elevator, and the officer's distant radio chatter. Then, nothing, just me, still standing, not broken, not today. I walked to the window and looked down as the police cruiser pulled away. My parents and Ronan sat in the back seat, faces turned away, like strangers now. My phone buzzed again, another comment under my mother's post, another stranger's opinion about a life they didn't live, but I didn't open it, not yet. I made myself coffee instead, something hot, grounding. The kind of small thing that reminded me I was still here, still whole. The rest of the day passed in a kind of quiet motion. No yelling, no banging, no one calling me a thief. Until later that night. When I finally sat down and opened my laptop, an email pinged into my inbox, from a name I didn't recognize. But the subject line sent a cold shiver through me. Urgent, legal claim filed, property dispute. I stared at the screen. The real fight hadn't even started. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom that didn't feel like justice, just colder, with polished floors and fake ferns in the corners. The kind of place that tried too hard to look neutral while housing everything but neutrality. Across from me, my family took their seats like they were auditioning for sympathy. Ronan in a tailored suit that didn't fit his shoulders, my mother with tissues already in hand, and my father, silent, unreadable, like always. The attorney they'd hired was young, slick, and overly confident. The kind who talked with too much volume, like sound alone could win cases. "This is not a property dispute," he declared. "This is a matter of family loyalty and betrayal." I felt each word land like it was meant to bruise. The judge's expression stayed flat. My attorney leaned in and whispered, "Don't react. Not yet." I didn't. I'd rehearsed this 100 times in my head. Maris was first to testify. She dabbed her eyes, her voice trembling just enough to seem credible. "We gave her everything," she said, "and she turned on us. She took the apartment we were preparing for Ronan. We trusted her, and she used us." Used. That word. The irony was enough to make me laugh if I hadn't been so tired. I watched as people in the courtroom, strangers, looked toward me. Their eyes were full of judgment they hadn't earned. Then Ronan stood. He brought forward a bank statement and claimed I had funneled funds meant for the family's joint account to pay for the apartment in my name. Gasps and whispers rippled through the benches. My throat tightened, but I stayed still. Let them stack their lies. They didn't know what I'd built. 2 days earlier, I'd spent the entire afternoon with my attorney, printing every receipt, email chain, deposit timestamp, down to the pen I'd used. I'd given him the Crowbar video, and the one from the family dinner, too. My insurance wasn't in what they said, it was in what they couldn't control. As Ronan stepped down, their lawyer called for a short recess. I watched my mother shift uncomfortably, her heels tapping against the tile. And then it happened. While shuffling through their exhibits, someone on their team projected the wrong file. It flickered for a second, just long enough. An email thread, her name in bold, Maris.vel email. The subject line, "Get ahead of her." The first sentence, "Post it before she can defend herself." The room went still, too quiet. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, brow furrowed. My mother's head turned toward me. She wasn't crying now. Her eyes darted, calculating, cracking. "Howard," my father whispered, too loud to be ignored. "Maris, what did you do?" No one answered, because now everyone knew. They didn't just try to hurt me, they planned it, they organized it, they timed it. I didn't smile, I didn't need to. I just exhaled. For the first time in what felt like weeks. The judge ordered a recess to review all the materials, including the newly introduced emails. We stood, the tension stretching between us like a wire waiting to snap. As we gathered our things, Maris leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "You think this is over?" I met her gaze, steady, calm. "No, Mother, it's only just starting. For you." We walked out of that courtroom in opposite directions, but the silence between us echoed louder than any gavel could. I returned to my apartment that evening. No wine, no celebration, just stillness. For once, I didn't need to run a list in my head of what to prepare, what to fear. I simply sat, lights low, phone face down, folder still on the table, because the war wasn't over, but the ground had shifted. And I was finally standing on solid ground. I didn't feel victory. I felt silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm's passed, not because everything's calm, but because there's nothing left to say. The courtroom was colder than usual that morning. Maybe it was the marble walls, or maybe it was just me, stripped of every ounce of expectation. I didn't expect cheers. I didn't expect tears. I only wanted the truth to be recognized. The judge's voice came slow and measured, but final. Based on the evidence presented and the timeline confirmed by all submitted records, ownership of the property remains legally under Ms. Tamsin Vale. This case is hereby dismissed. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Ronan shoved his chair back so hard it scraped against the floor, a sharp sound that cut through the room. My mother covered her face with both hands, letting out a quiet gasp like the drama wasn't over yet. And my father, he just stared at the floor like he'd finally seen it, the crack that split everything wide open. I stood up. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. For once, their reactions weren't mine to manage. Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with flashing cameras. Microphones were shoved toward me. Someone asked if I felt vindicated, if I planned to reconcile, if I had a message for other families in crisis. I walked right past them all. I didn't owe the world a soundbite. I owed myself peace. I held the envelope tightly under my coat as I walked home. The court papers with my name where it was always meant to be. Black ink, simple font, but it felt like something holy. By the time I reached my building, the buzz of reporters had faded. The wind had picked up just enough to remind me autumn wasn't waiting for anyone. I reached my apartment door, ready to put this day behind me. But there it was, an envelope, no return address, tucked under the mat. Inside, the same key they'd used the morning they tried to break in. I knew it by the scratch near the base, the one from when I dropped it years ago on a sidewalk outside campus. Taped to the back was a note, my mother's handwriting. "Keep it. You'll need it where you're going." No signature, no warmth. Just a sentence, sharp and bitter as always. Like a parting shot from someone still holding the script, even after the curtain had fallen. I turned the key over in my palm. It no longer felt like access. It felt like history. A relic of everything I'd let go. I walked inside, opened the drawer near my sink, and dropped it in without a word. Then I walked the apartment slowly, room by room. Hand grazing the bookshelf, the kitchen counter, the edge of the couch where I'd fallen asleep so many late nights after work. Every piece in that space had been chosen by me, paid for, fought for, survived for, and now defended. The silence wasn't empty. It was mine. I sat down at the dining table, the same one I'd bought secondhand from a teacher leaving town. There was a scratch on the edge from when I moved it in alone, bruising my thigh. I ran my fingers across it now and smiled, just a little. This place wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And then the words came, quiet but certain, like a thought that had always been sitting in the back of my mind, waiting for room to breathe. You spend your whole life trying to prove you're a good daughter. Then one day, you realize good was never the problem. Obedience was. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I lit a single candle in the window, sat by the sill, and watched the city stretch out in lights and movement. No applause, no parade, just air in my lungs and the knowing that I'd done the hardest thing I'd ever done, and walked away still standing. That silence, it didn't ache anymore. It anchored me. It had been 33 days since the courthouse doors closed behind me. 33 quiet, strange, healing days. I'd learned how to breathe again without holding my shoulders tight, how to fill a Saturday without scanning my phone for fallout. But peace, I've found, doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it knocks softly. Sometimes it comes in a manila envelope. It was a Monday, the kind of gray morning that hums low and steady, like the world's holding its breath. I was in Houston, sitting across from a lawyer whose office smelled like laminate and peppermint tea. She pushed a document across the desk, her voice even. "This letter came in last week, certified mail, postmarked Austin, from your mother's estate advisor." I recognized the envelope before I opened it. That stiff cream stock Maris always used. The kind that tried to feel expensive even when the contents inside weren't worth a dime. Inside, 3 pages, a notarized asset transfer. Every last family holding, the house, what remained of the business, the joint investments, all now in Ronan's name. And one handwritten note, folded neatly, clipped to the back. "You always wanted to stand on your own. Now you can." No greeting, no love, not even a signature. Just the parting line of someone who thinks they're ending a conversation when really they're just confirming what's long been true. The lawyer across from me watched my face carefully, waiting for a reaction, maybe tears, maybe anger. But I felt neither. I folded the letter and looked up. "That it?" She hesitated. "There's one more thing." Of course there was. "Your brother, he filed to list your apartment as a business asset again, last week." I let out a breath. Not surprised, just tired. "Is that even legal?" "No, and he knows it. But bankruptcy courts don't always check every claim until it's contested." I nodded slowly. "Let's contest it." She slid over another form. I signed it without flinching. No fire this time, just quiet certainty. Ronan had made the same mistake twice, trying to take something I built with his name, like it meant more than my sweat. Driving home that afternoon, I passed by the diner where I once worked double shifts, pie crust under my fingernails, and textbooks in my backpack. A few miles later, I slowed as I passed the old school building, the one I'd written tuition checks for when Ronan forgot to pay on time. They were ghosts now, markers of all the ways I showed up when no one ever returned the gesture. By the time I parked outside my apartment, the sun had dipped behind a veil of misty rain. I took the elevator up, coat damp, keys cold in hand. Inside, it was warm. Still, familiar. I poured a glass of water, took off my shoes, and sat on the floor with my sketchbook. The mentorship program, the one I'd nearly turned down out of guilt months ago, had sent new prompts for their community housing redesigns. I flipped through my old ideas, and then I started sketching something new. For the first time, my hands didn't shake when I drew. Later that night, I lit the same candle I had weeks ago. It flickered near the window, casting soft shapes across the wall. I placed the old key next to it, the one my mother had mailed back like a warning. It no longer felt threatening, it felt small, outdated, like something meant for a lock I'd long since thrown away. A breeze moved through the room, the flame trembled, then steadied again. "You can't take light," I whispered, "from someone who stopped living in your shadow." The room didn't answer. It didn't need to. My phone buzzed once, a text from the mentorship coordinator. "Congratulations, Tamsin. You've been selected as lead designer for the new program. I closed my eyes, just for a second, then smiled, small and full. A second buzz followed. Unknown number. I stared at it, let it ring. Then I flipped the phone over, face down, and left it there on the table. Some things don't deserve to be answered. Outside, the rain eased into a shimmer. The skyline glowed like quiet promises. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. I stepped to the window, arms crossed loosely, forehead against the glass. Forgiveness isn't about letting them back in, I murmured. It's about walking out and never locking yourself behind their door again. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them to come home, because I finally was.